Okay, it says it is recording now.
Excellent.
So, welcome to the show that has no name because this isn't a Q&A. I'm Panyo Basa, and this is my honored guest, Otto Excelsior. And by popular demand, he is back, and we're going to talk about something or other
Mm.
while I sip on bovine glandular secretions.
Mm.
And I think,
Water.
excuse me?
Plasticized water for me.
Oh, yeah, exactly. So I think what we're going to talk about is Buddhist heavens and in comparison to other heaven realms, especially like the Norse Valhalla idea,
Sounds
right?
good to me. Yeah, I think
Do it then.
it's kind of interesting to compare and contrast these things a little bit. Um, the One of the aspects of heaven in Buddhist cosmology, as I understand it, is that heaven is not eternal. Heaven is basically confined to the lifespan of the universe, and maybe not even that. Whereas in Judeo-Christian belief, once you get to heaven, it's a very linear view of history. You get to heaven, and it's over. Boom, that's it, forever and ever and ever. Whereas even though you might be, take rebirth in a heavenly realm with a heavenly body, and then what you might call an angelic or godlike body, that's still temporary. And you are going to go somewhere else. And as you pointed out, anything that has a beginning has an ending. Um, so this idea of there being an ending to heaven is something that is not found in traditional Judeo-Christian belief, but it is found in Norse belief with the idea of Valhalla, the heaven of heroes, for those who are chosen by the Valkyries to go to Odin's Hall, where they have a heavenly existence, but with the knowledge that that existence is going to come to an end sometime. And Odin, although he's the supreme god and is described as an all-father, still he knows that he's not going to be in that position forever, that there's going to be others. And I thought it's kind of interesting to have the same perspective on the afterlife.
Yeah, well, I mean, there are similarities between like the Norse conception of like deities and heaven realms and like the ancient Indian conception of deities and heaven realms. I mean, also you had the primordial like enmity between the gods and the Titans, which is
Yes,
also
yeah,
there in Norse mythology.
yeah.
And you're saying that Odin knows that he'll be replaced, or that there'll be somebody else in his position afterwards. So I mean, how does that work in Norse mythology? If you've got like in Indian in cosmology, it's like um, the universe expands and contracts and is destroyed, and then a new
Yeah,
universe emanates through the power of ignorance and karma, and then it expands and contracts. It's just cyclical. And there's the gods can, I mean, some of the higher gods can last longer than a world system. The immaterial gods
right.
are not reliant on like material cosmic phenomena or anything, so they can live for
Yeah,
many world cycles.
yeah. Well, I think obviously the Indian cosmological ideas are going to be more refined, more sophisticated. Part of the problem with our knowledge of Norse mythology is that it is rather limited to a certain extent. We're talking about basically a handful of poems, sagas, and stuff. So what we
Yeah,
really have
a lot
are
of it was written
literary.
in Christian times.
Right. So exactly. So even though I think these were people that were trying to retain the pagan poetical traditions, and it's been pointed out when they were preserving these poems, they weren't really frightened of paganism. It wasn't that they were trying to destroy these ideas, but they were simply very uninterested in the details. These were like Lutherans and Christians, so when they would preserve the poetry and especially the kennings, which are very very useful for us to understand how people thought of these gods. The kennings are of course different descriptive words or phrases that they would use for different gods and creatures and this and that. So that can give us some idea of their underlying mythology. But when they were preserving these things, they really weren't interested in the details of how they were worshipped or theological details and stuff like that. So to a certain degree, we have to sort of draw parallels with other Indo-European traditions. We know
Especially
that in
Germanic ones, if you want to understand the Norse.
right, yeah. I mean, there were people, especially in the 19th and early 20th century, as they would look at like what we had of Germanic mythology, and then just like, well, let's fill it in with what we know of Hinduism, and that's that might give you some broad guidelines. But I know in the Indian systems, the idea was basically that the it wasn't so much that you were a god as it was an office, so that like you were saying, you'd be replaced. There's remember the story Joseph Campbell used to talk about when Indra was getting above himself, and I think it was Shiva and Vishnu came down and incarnated as a little Brahma boy and a yogi, and at one point there's like an army of ants 4 yards wide just marching for like minutes and minutes and minutes across the hall, and the boy laughs and Indra says, "What are you laughing at?" It's like, "Don't ask." He says, "Well, tell me, teach." He says, "You see all those ants there? Former Indras all. Each one of them had been an Indra, a supreme god, and now, through karma, they've basically gone back down again because, you get all this nice karma and you're Indra, and you don't really practice or anything because you're just kind of relaxing and you use up all your karmic energy and then down you go, kind of deal." But with Odin and the rebirth of the universe, we don't have a whole lot about it, but it is and the whole idea of Ragnarok, this final fight between the gods and the anti-gods, and we were talking earlier off camera about this is reminiscent of the Devas and the Asuras,
Yeah,
struggling.
also the gods and the titans in Greek mythology.
Right, you've always got this war in heaven kind of thing going, and it's often been pointed to as a way to externalize and mythologize struggles between different peoples. We know that whereas the Devas, the Devas became the good gods, the positive gods to the Indians. I believe it wasn't in Persia. It was the Asuras who were seen as the positive deities. So you could posit that there was a sort of a cultural clash, between those two different civilizations, and this is reflected in the struggle of their gods, respectively.
Yeah, I have read that there may have been like two main centers of the Proto-Indo-Europeans, and that one had one pantheon of gods and one, like brotherhood of priests, and the other one had a different pantheon of gods and a different brotherhood of priests. And naturally, they came into conflict over, whose pantheon of gods was going to be the
Right,
pantheon of gods.
right, yeah,
And then
yeah,
it happened so long ago before the big diaspora, throughout
right,
throughout most of Eurasia, that
right,
this got carried into all these different places, and they've theoretically, ex hypothesis, they forgot about the two different tribes or groups of people that had two different pantheons, and they just saw it as a war between the gods.
right. They remembered the pantheons. They didn't remember the people for whom they were. Well, it's interesting in Norse myth. You've got the Aesir, the main group of gods. You've got the Jotun, often translated as giants, much like the Greek Titans, the
Yeah, the
anti-gods.
Asuras are also considered to be gigantic.
Yeah, and you've also got the Vanir, who are gods who apparently, according to what we, Snorri, um, were gods that had warred with the Aesir gods, and then they had a treaty. So some of them came to live with the Aesir gods as hostages. They would do the trading hostages back and forth kind of deal. And some of the Asgard gods went to stay with the Vanir. And in fact, one of the gods who was sent to the Vanir is going to be one of the gods taking over in the new universe after Ragnarok. The children of Thor will find his hammer, and they'll find some of the old things, and they'll start everything going all over again.
So
But
not
it's a
all of
much
them are going to die then.
no, no, not all of them are going to die. Thor's children survive, and supposedly there will be a human man and a human woman hiding in an ash tree, and they will be the progenitors of the next human race, and some of the gods will survive. And and it's kind of unspoken, but the Vanir weren't really involved in this struggle. So if you can be a hostage with the Vanir and survive, that's probably all the Vanir are going to survive as well. So Yeah, but there was, it was a destruction, but it wasn't a complete destruction. It wasn't a complete annihilation. Again, this is a more sophisticated concept that we see more in Indian cosmology. And as you
But
point
still,
out,
it does indicate that the gods, the Norse gods, were mortal, and even though they
yeah,
live much longer than we do and were
yeah,
harder to kill than we are, still
yeah,
they eventually die.
yeah, just like the Norse, titles of Odin are like all father, all creator, all begetter. I mean, like a powerful, and this, you can argue this might have been influenced by Christianity and Christian ideas of Jehovah, the all being kind of deal. But Odin was very important to his worshippers, and so even a god who is addressed as the All Father could be seen as being mortal, basically. That this, no matter how big and powerful he is, one of the people that helped construct the universe around us. But even so, these gods were creating things out of pre-existing material. Ymir, the frost giant, became the world. Um, placing different parts of his body. And this is a common
Yeah, well,
mythology.
that's in the Rig Veda also. The what was he?
Yeah,
The Purisha, who I mean, his body was divided up and turned into the cosmos essentially.
right. And the Jains have an idea of the cosmos as like a huge body, the cosmic man. So it's kind of interesting. These traditions have that there is something pre-existing. I think it's with the application of Greek idealism and thought to the Hebrew notions. We suddenly had a God who was creating something out of nothing. Which I think that's kind of new with those guys. I don't know. I don't
Yeah, I
think
mean,
anybody.
originally it would have been chaos. I mean, you
Mhm.
start with chaos, just primordial lack of order, and
Yeah,
then it would form into something. But I mean, it's sort of like Hegel again. Pure being and pure non-being are they just blend into each other because they can't be differentiated. And so I assume the primordial chaos could be seen as a kind of nothingness.
or an undifferentiation. Well, you did have God's spirit moving upon the waters, and water is a traditional symbol for chaos. There's no differentiation anymore. Water rises and it covers all the different permutations. It's just like one level immersion kind of deal. And I think a good way to describe chaos. And I think as humans, much of our existence is bringing order out of chaos to a greater or lesser extent. So these are concepts that resonate with us. But the Norse gods were definitely creating, Odin, Vili, and Ve, were creating a universe out of pre-existing materials. Whereas I think the idea behind the Hebrew creator god was more, again, just I say it happens. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God. The idea of the creative Word. Although that does raise up some ideas it wasn't the Kalevala, the Finnish mythological epic, where it was all
Yeah.
about they would sing, make poems, and this is what created things. Wonder if there's a connection there. Maybe God
Yeah,
is
I'm not
Finnish.
sure. I mean, the ancient Greek and Roman gods. I mean, they didn't create the universe either. I mean,
No,
they're
no,
just higher than us and presumably immortal, but still, I
no.
mean, the universe was already here. It seems like.
Right. They were the children of the universe. They were the children of the earth and the sky, Uranus and Gaia. And it's an incredible, the first two primordial deities of the Greeks and of all European tradition are Gaia and Uranus. Now, if Beavis and Butthead were not planning our cosmos, I don't know. There's something there. But
Yeah,
yeah, the gods are all children, and of course, Zeus famously was the son of Saturn, who was consuming his children, all devouring time, because he knew that one of them was going to overthrow him, and Zeus managed it. Zeus
yeah.
managed it. So
So even the Greeks had a concept of gods who could die.
yeah, and gods who had the same kind of patterns of behavior as us, and even the same kind of biological um, motives as us, which is kind of
Yeah,
interesting.
liking for pretty girls, for example.
Oh yeah, 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 and well, the whole idea of Eros being the prime mover. This is a
Yeah,
later, more sophisticated idea, but that just the whole energy of Eros life recreating itself is what got everything going in the universe. Until then, nothing was happening.
So it seems to me that, I mean, like in the Old Testament, what I know of like early Jewish conceptions of heaven, it wasn't as exalted as, later Christianity, like what you see in the book of Revelation. It was,
Right.
it was sort of like God had his council up there, and, like in the book of Job, it's like he's just kind of hanging out with Satan and having this discussion on what we should do with Job. And um, it's rather different from what you read in the book of Revelation, where you've got God's throne in the center, and then you've just got like legions of angels all around him, just falling on their face over and over again, saying,
Yeah.
"Holy, holy,
Yeah.
holy, holy, holy."
Yeah.
I mean, that doesn't sound like a good time to me. I mean, they might have been, they were obviously in some kind of exalted mental state,
Right.
but yeah, it's really not the sort of thing that would attract the average person to want to go to heaven, other than just the fear of the alternative.
Right.
So, I mean, it's like that's another similarity of Norse heaven and like the Indian, especially the lower heavens, is that it's a place of sensual pleasure. Also, Islamic heaven's that way too. It's just like paradise. You're
Mhm.
just young and beautiful, and you're surrounded by hotties, and
Yeah.
you
Yeah. Yeah.
enjoy
Plenty
the
to eat and
pleasures of the
drink.
senses, pleasure gardens and all that.
Yeah. 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 With the Norse,
And
of
then in
course.
Valhalla, of course, they're just drinking themselves into a stupor.
Well, in this kind of subsistence existence that most Scandinavian people had in the Middle Ages, paradise is plenty to eat, plenty to drink, and you go out and you can get into a fight, and the next day you'll be fine. You won't have any scars, nothing. So it really for people, I'm reminded of the I forget the exact. It was one of the Celtic stories. It was basically a fairy tale, but it was about a building made out of butter and lard and bacon and sausage. Just this whole idea of food and drink can really drive people who are really living on the edge. It's kind of interesting. A more refined Oriental paradise is like fountains of wine and this and that. Norse Paradise is it's a warm place to sit and there's plenty of food and something to drink. It's not too sophisticated, but they didn't have sophisticated wants, I think. But again, we don't know because all we have are the literary remains. We don't know. I mean, the old mute and glorious Miltons. Who knows how many mute and glorious pagan Thomas Aquinas there may have been among the pagan Icelanders. We don't know. None of their theological ideas have been preserved. We don't know how sophisticated they got. But what we do see though is an idea that the gods are mortal. That these heavens are not the final word. That there's going to be more coming after that. And again, this is something that struck me when I was watching a video about. I'm not good at pronouncing these things, but the Brahmana Mantanika Sutta, where basically the Buddha goes up to talk to Indra, the equivalent. I forget his name. I think Indra, and Indra's like, I am it. I'm everything. I am the supreme
Yeah, it's
God. And the Buddha
Brahma.
says,
He's talking to
yeah,
Mahabrahma.
yeah, and he says, no, no, you're not. Let me show you a few things. And that's what made me think about, well, Valhalla's kind of like that too. It's a temporary heaven, even though it's ruled over by a god who had the titles of all father, all begetter, all creator of everything, which were Odin's titles, by the period that we're talking about. Um, Although again, pagans were kind of interesting about that. They didn't seem to have the same sort of worry about, well, if my God is true, that means your God must be false. Pagan temples seem to be able to, you can go and worship, Shiva, you can go and worship Vishnu, you can worship Kali, you can worship,
Yeah.
this and that, and then nobody really gets bent out of shape just because they have different mythologies, different legends. Um, in fact, I've heard it said that Hinduism as such doesn't really exist. This is something that the British came up with as a way to classify all these different pagan religions. That properly understood, they're just all separate religions, dozens and dozens of them in India. And well, we just worship this god, we just worship that god. They really are better looked at as just separate religions that can coexist without anyone worrying
Yeah.
about.
Well, I mean, the Hindus, even in ancient times, they did have one criterion, and that is do you consider the Vedas to be authoritative?
Right. Right.
So, I mean, the Buddhists did not consider the Vedas to be authoritative. The Jains didn't. Other sects didn't, and so they weren't considered to be within the fold of
Right. Right.
Vedic religion.
But they were still
So, I mean,
tolerated in Indian
to the people
society.
that say that Hinduism isn't a religion, that it's just like an ethnicity or a culture or something, I'll just point out that, I mean, it's a really straightforward definition: is that anyone who considers the Vedas to be
Oh
authoritative.
yeah, yeah. And all the different worshippers of the Greek gods. I mean, the worshippers of Saturn probably had a different right than the worshippers of Mars, but they all agreed on the idea that this pantheon exists, all these gods interact and
Yeah,
exist.
yeah. The
But
Romans were
each
cool
one would
with
have its
both.
own. Perhaps cult would be the better term. Each one would have its own cult, its own ceremonies, its own legends. And if they contradicted the other ones, nobody really cared or paid much attention, I don't think.
Yeah, yeah. The Romans were cool with just the religions of Egypt and Greece and whatever other culture that they came in contact with, except for the Christians and maybe the Celts. In
And the
that, with
Druids,
regards to
yeah.
the Christians, because the Christians are saying only our God is real and you guys worship devils.
Right. Well, I think the problem with Christianity they found was that Christianity forbade its adherents to make sacrifice to the Roman gods, and at that point, sacrificing the Roman gods was just basically seen as like it'd be like not saluting the flag in 1950. When you come in to go to court, well, no, I can't put my hand on the Bible. No, I can't salute the flag. You would be seen as like, whoa, there's something wrong with these people here. And at a time of great political dissension, when you really were, they were desperately trying to keep Roman society from like collapsing. I mean,
Yeah,
some of the stuff they were doing. A lot of the ideas of the Middle Ages came out of like the late Roman Empire. I forget which emperor did it, but basically froze everybody in their jobs. If you were a candle maker, then your kids had to be candle makers. They tried free wage and price controls. Those things never worked. They were getting very desperate. So anyone that was rocking the boat like the Christians, and of course the Druids, the Druids were again seen as a political threat. I don't think they worried much about theological threats, but I think they saw Christianity as a political statement, and certainly they saw Druidism as a political statement.
yeah, and
Um,
certainly Jesus was crucified not for theological or religious purposes, but because he was being called the King of the Jews.
well,
And
that's something else, and I don't know how widespread the crucifix itself was in the early church. But again, the idea is you're embracing an emblem of execution of so it's well, I think of these kids today that go around dressed in prison garb, as if that's you see people walk around sometimes in like orange jumpsuits, as a kind of a fashion statement. But it's like yeah, you're basically embracing something and using as your symbol something that's seen as a form of execution, meaning this is a very bad person. Nobody crucifies nice people. The people that are crucified are highwaymen and robbers and criminals and people that aren't nice. Just like most people in maximum security jails. I mean, I'm sure there might be a few people that shouldn't be there, but most of them are simply not nice people. So it'd be like saying, putting a jail cell on your flag or something like that. So that must have been very intimidating to people. It's kind of a scary emblem. You've got this crucified God.
it
Um,
is kind of interesting to me, though, that the Christian heaven is so different from like most of the other heavens. I think there must have been a lot of Greek philosophy going into influencing this rather cold, sterile conception of heaven.
oh well, I think I accept Russell Gummerkin's idea that the Pentateuch was composed around the reign of Ptolemy II, and nobody really. I mean, this is the traditional story: is he moves the date by about 40 years, but this is when all this was written down, and there was, although it was based obviously on they couldn't just create it out of entirely whole cloth. A lot of the ideas of especially the Greeks of Plato were incorporated into the theology. That's why later on people like Philo Judaeus could be writing about, wow, there's so much Platonism in Genesis and Exodus. If you just look for it, it shows that the Greeks must have been inspired by Moses and his ideas. And in fact, these ideas were put into the religion way after Plato, and were a deliberate incorporation of Greek ideas into Judaism. That what we consider modern Judaism basically did not exist before then. Judaism was a much closer to the other Mediterranean religions that it is part of the continuum of. Judaism doesn't exist in a vacuum. No religion does. It's a very old religion, and it is part of the culture that existed in the eastern end of the Mediterranean basin at that time. And they found these many letters written from a Jewish military colony at Elephantine. And there's all kinds of very interesting things in there that we see. Now, these letters predate the Pentateuch's composition. So what's very interesting, for example, we know that one of the most popular Jewish names is Moses. Another one is Aaron. There's no trace of those names. And on any of these documents, we have the names of dozens and dozens and dozens of Jewish soldiers and administrators and stuff. Moshe never shows up once. Aaron never shows up once, as if nobody'd ever heard of these people before. So a lot of, creating a national hero, creating a national literature, all this is prescribed by Plato as a way of creating a new state. This is the Republic. And of course, their ultimate goal was to create rule by philosopher kings. I don't think they ever quite got that far, but
they had rule by high priests,
they did, which I'm sure they saw themselves as philosopher kings. You see, the ancients were very, very sophisticated. They understood social engineering very well. So, but it's interesting that we see when we look at these other documents that predate the time period that Gmerkin mentions. We see no evidence of any idea of a lot of these for example, having their own temple down at Elephantine. They were in regular communication with the priesthood at Jerusalem. There was not even a hint of the idea that they should have a separate temple, but we know that under Mosaic law and under the way it was presented, you weren't supposed to have any temple other than the one in Jerusalem. And that's where all the sacrifices were supposed to go. What this did was it centralized the power of the Jerusalem priesthood, who at that time were allies of Ptolemy II. They were depending upon Egyptian support to maintain their position at the time. So at that time, they were basically a client state of Egypt. And that's why you see a lot of positive things about Ptolemy in the Bible if you look for them. But so these Greek ideas were, again, part of the continuum of ideas at the Eastern Mediterranean at that time. So it's not surprising, and it's kind of interesting because there are people who will tell you that Judaism is a foreign Asiatic kind of an idea. Its offshoots like Christianity and Islam are the same, and they have no place here at the West. But if you consider that modern Judaism incorporates a lot of the ideas of Plato and Greek thinkers,
Christianity even more.
Yeah, there's nothing more Western than that. So that places Judaism and Christianity right at the heart of Western culture and civilization. And it also just goes to show you what you can do with Plato. He's dangerous stuff, that Plato.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of interesting contrast that you've got. The Christians and maybe to some degree the Jews have this, just this practically a cold, sterile, abstract kind of heaven. And then everyone else has got more of a, it's like being a human except better.
Yeah, that's Platonism, I think. The higher intellectual. Well, though, even in Buddhism, I mean, the lower heavens there's a lot of pleasure there, but you're getting above sensual pleasures. I mean, don't the Devas?
I was going to get to the Buddhist ones.
Oh, okay.
Buddhism has like the full spectrum. It's like the lower heaven realms are not so different from Valhalla.
Right.
It's just sensual pleasure as much as you want. You don't get sick. You don't get old.
Yeah.
Eventually, you just fade out. But there's no disease or anything like that. It's all just pleasant and nice, and just beautiful orchards. And you've got a harem of celestial nymphs and dancing girls and living in golden jewel-studded palaces. And it's that way pretty much all the way up through the sensual realms until you get into the Brahma realm, the Rupa Loka, and then things start getting more attenuated and sterile, and there's no no more gender, much less sex.
Right,
There's no
right.
more sensual pleasure because Brahmas don't even have tactile sensation anymore. I don't know how they could hold on to a cup without dropping it unless they use like the finger trick where you put your finger under the cup.
Would they be thirsty even though?
Yeah. And then finally you get up into the formless realms where it's just like mind just sort of bathing in bliss for countless eons until finally you
Oh,
used up your karma and then it's back down into some other realm again.
which just
So
goes to show
Buddhism has sort of a full spectrum.
you should keep up your practice even in the Deva realms. Keep practicing because you can. You can. I've never heard that you can. It's just more difficult, I guess.
Yeah, when you get up into the formless realms, then you're stuck because you can't hear Dhamma because you don't have ears anymore. So that was what happened according to the legend when the Buddha became enlightened. He first was wanting to look up his two main old teachers, and he couldn't help them because they were in a formless realm. They had cultivated these formless jhanas, and so they were up in this formless realm where they were inaccessible because they couldn't hear Dhamma or anything. And so he went and looked for his old five comrades that he was practicing austerities with because his teachers just couldn't they couldn't hear Dhamma because they had reached this heaven realm that was a kind of spiritual dead end.
Yeah, actually, I was about to ask you about that very question. I remember reading about that and thinking, are once you're in the formless realms, are you there forever?
No, nothing lasts forever.
So
You know,
maybe they will get a chance to hear the Dhamma.
yeah, it's going to take many, many world cycles, many,
Yeah, yeah, it's going to be a while. It
but
might even be a different
eventually their
Buddha.
karma will be exhausted and then they'll come back down to some lower realm where they can hear Dhamma again.
They're sort of in a waiting room.
Yeah, I guess, or they're just sort of like in like an eons long heroin euphoria or something. I mean, it'd be more exalted than a heroin euphoria. I've never been high on heroin, but I would assume that it would be more exalted than that. But still, it's so attenuated that there's almost nothing happening, and so you're just in this state of bliss for just eons.
You know,
And most people couldn't stand that either. It's like there's the story in Ledi Seattle. It's found in a sutta somewhere, and I probably told you this before about how the Buddhist cosmos, the universe, every zillion gajillion years it gets destroyed, usually by fire, and then but all these beings who lived in the universe, they have to go somewhere. They can't just cease to exist because their karma is still keeping them going. So they
right.
all have to go up into this really exalted heaven realm that's above the material level. And it's like there are yogis and swamis who are striving to get into these exalted heaven realms and fail, but now everybody goes up there. Actors and mosquitoes and snapping turtles and
Right,
politicians,
right.
everybody is going up into this heaven realm and they can't stand it. It's almost like being in hell. They're just bored stiff. So that as soon as the physical universe rematerializes, they're just abandoning it like rats abandoning a sinking ship because they're just not ready for that sort of thing.
Their cravings are just like, yeah, they're craving stuff that isn't there.
Yeah, and I think all of us, I mean, the reason why we're here at the human level is this is where we belong at present. This is where we feel most comfortable, where we fit in the best.
Well, it's like a specific gravity, as I always thought of it, sort of thing. You kind of rise or sink to your level
Yeah.
in the
And
cosmos.
there are some people like that. I mean, I've met quite a few people that they're just miserable unless they got some kind of trouble going on. They
Mm.
just
Oh, oh,
like sort of career criminals. Some of them are like that, or just people that they they have such a coarse sense of identity that it's sort of like a hand that they can't feel its existence unless it's like hitting against something or pressing against
yeah,
something. They've
yeah,
got like
yeah,
numbed senses with regard to that, and so they're just out just like the bull in the china shop, just feeling more alive by doing that.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh,
And
yeah,
so
and
there's no way they'd want some Christian heaven realm or one of the exalted
right.
Buddhist heaven realms. I mean, they couldn't stand it. It'd be like hell for them.
Yeah, that's not where they're headed for. You know, it's not something that's going to appeal to them, certainly. And, I mean, anything, Stim is Stim, as we used to say in the human services field. We've talked about this before. I'm sure I've mentioned when you get like, angry or despairing or whatever, this creates all sorts of changes in your bodily chemistry. You can get addicted to the adrenaline, to all these things, the feeling of anger, the feeling of despair. That's why the country music industry exists. I mean, I've been playing a lot of country music. Some of these songs are really horrible, and people go and they get drunk and they listen to this stuff so they can cry a tear in their beer, and they're looking forward to feeling miserable because, again, the body is very easily addicted to these different chemicals. There's people that are not happy unless they can be really miserable.
Yeah, plus it's just part of your identity. I mean, if you've grown up just identified with some physical ailment or shortcoming, or just everyone hates me, or all men are pigs or something, then I mean, any evidence to the contrary, especially if you've been going at it for decades, it's just going to be threatening a certain aspect of your personality. It's going to be like a miniature death if you get proven wrong.
Yeah.
So most people just aren't ready for. I mean, even like a Muslim or Norse heaven might be too trouble-free for their liking.
Yeah. I don't know, Norse heaven. They said they just put a sword in your hand and you spend all day chopping and hacking, and then you spend all night drinking and carousing with lots of good-looking Valkyries to hang out with. So I was always hoping that there'd be a nice library there somewhere, but things like reading weren't really.
A few Vikings who could read, maybe.
Yeah, No. It's a heaven for everybody. Everybody's got their own goal, and but that reminds me of something I've been thinking about on and off for a while. Now in Buddhism, when we die, it's very important our mental state. As you pointed out yourself, in fact, Buddhism is profoundly psychological. It has to do with our intentions. It has to do with our mental states. And when we're leaving this life and probably going on to another, unless, I don't think any of us here are ants. If we are, we're certainly keeping it very, very well secreted. But that the condition of our mind at the moment of death is a very, very important part of where we're going to go after death. And of course, the example people love to bring up, and we've talked about this before, is Anguli Mala, the man who killed like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people. But by the end of his life, he was actually an arhat. So that there's hope that if you can have the right view by the end of your life, you'll go somewhere better. I mean, probably not, escaping entirely, but hopefully going somewhere better than you would otherwise. Now, since this seems to be, as I understand it, purely having to do with your mental attitude, my first thought was, what if when someone was dying, you drugged them in such a way that they had a really good mental attitude? Would that count?
Or the deathbed repentance?
Well, yeah. But this would be a chemical repentance. If I'm just thinking, if you gave somebody, especially somebody who was an experienced, shall we say, psychonaut, the right combination of mushrooms or LSD or whatever, and whatever other comestibles as they approach death, to put them into this like a very groovy kind of mental state. Would this be would this mental state be? I don't know. I guess I'm trying to say is it's a mental state no matter what. So simply because it's chemically induced doesn't mean it's not valid, right? It would still influence where the aggregates, where the flame leaps from this house to go to the next house. I know we're talking about ultimately an illusion.
It's possible, although, I mean, it's like your last moment doesn't determine your entire next existence. It's pretty much, it's conditions, like your bearing. It's like it might cause you to be reborn in a heaven realm, but if most of your life has been bad and you've got this accumulation of bad karma, then you're not going to stay there for very long. Things are going to go wrong. You might get kicked out by, whatever, or, you get reborn as a person, like some rich kid or something, then you're going to just crash and burn, that kind of existence.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you still have all this karma that doesn't just disappear because you had good enough mental states at the moment of death that you got into a
Okay.
relatively good realm.
So it's a Band-Aid. It would be a Band-Aid. It wouldn't really deal with anything underlying.
Well, it'll have you like facing in a better direction at the moment of death, but
Right.
still, you still got all the baggage that you had before,
Yeah.
all the karmic baggage.
And to tell you the truth, I don't know enough about dying to know how well this would actually work, because you can have very strange time distortions. Moments can take months or weeks or years. So who knows what's really going on at that moment? Well, we all
Yeah.
do, but we forget. But just a thought.
Yeah.
Thank you for
So, are
dealing
we
with it.
done talking about heaven? Anything
Yeah, I
else?
think so. Oh my goodness, 41 minutes and 55 seconds. Yeah, I think we about tapped that out. But yeah, I can't think of anything more offhand to say. But we were talking about, the dichotomy between the idea of a heavenly realm that's temporary and fun, and heavenly realms that are permanent and not so fun.
Yeah,
Although,
especially the heaven realm of the Jehovah Witnesses, where it's only 144,000 people get up there, and they all have like administrative jobs for the kingdom of heaven.
they just want to keep you working.
Yeah,
Keep you
and then
working.
the rest of the good folks stay down on Earth and essentially go on picnics and pick fruits and vegetables and hug large wild animals forever and ever.
Okay, well, it might be fun for a little while, but I'm sure they'd find other things to do.
Yeah, after a few million years, I think hugging the rhinoceros is going to get kind of old.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. They'd probably find some sort of other activities. They'd probably start just puddling about, and some start doing things like starting businesses, making movies, competing with each other, getting into fights, marking off territory.
Could
I mean,
be.
if nothing else, it would pass the time.
Maybe that's the 1,000 years that the Book of Revelation is talking about. How after 1,000 years, then Satan will be able to get loose a little bit every now and then.
Oh, there we go. Stir things up a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So maybe some other time we can talk about hell, since we've already talked about heaven this time.
That might not be a bad idea. Hell's usually more interesting. I
Yeah.
remember one quote I heard was a Buddha quote: "Nothing anyone else says or does to you can send you to hell."
Yeah. And then, of course, William Blake in his Marriage of Heaven and Hell, he's talking about how Milton was really inspired when discussing hell and the devil and so forth, but he was in shackles when trying to describe heaven, just because everything interesting happens in hell, and pretty much all you got left in heaven is boredom.
Well, there's that, but on the other hand, I can't help but think that some of the descriptions of heaven are metaphorical.
Well, they have to be.
Didn't the sons of morning shout for joy before the throne of God, or something like that? I
Yeah.
mean, they're having fun and singing. I mean, we have this idea of strumming a harp and singing and just praising God all day. But on the other hand, when you're really inspired and happy, people sing. We don't have it so much anymore, but I've been in groups where when you sing together, it's really fun. You're having a good time. So one can at least hope that these are spontaneous generations of outward, expressions of an inward joy of being in the presence of God, rather than just like, here's your harp, here's your music. All right, band practice on Mondays. All right, everybody. What is it? What is it? A mighty fortress is our God. All right, take it from the top. Blah 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 blah. But yeah, you're right. Hell is usually more interesting. I mean, everybody reads the Inferno and the Divine Comedy. Who really reads the Purgatorio? Much less, all the when he gets all the way up to heaven. So
Paradiso.
Paradiso, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, but you
Yeah,
always
and then
want to
again,
read
on the
stuff
other
that
hand,
makes.
it's like everything balances out in the long run. This is one reason why I've never believed in like total happiness anywhere. It's just it gets more subtle, the higher up you go.
Right.
But still, I mean, you're not going to have just one side of the coin. There's always going to be a balance of happy and unhappy, or positive
Yeah,
and negative.
that's part of the happiness. The coin is one thing. So if you try to slice it in two, you're still going to have two sides to it.
Yeah,
Even if you don't, yeah, even if you don't call it, yeah, it wouldn't work. It wouldn't work.
Yeah. All right. I guess we've finished talking about heaven then, and so feel free to look at Otto's channel on Bitchute. You've got a channel on Bitchute, the Navakavada channel, right?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. Don't do a whole lot with it these days, but I should. I should start doing more stuff now. Actually, I'm hopefully going to be making a new Navakavada video soon. And I've also been making some shorter videos with my very good and admirable friend Roberta de Wessex. And we've been producing some nice little content there. I'm concentrating on short, little like 10 to 15 minute long, you know, straight from the shoulder kind of short things. Not like these wonderfully long, drawn out, hour long, well, 46-minute
Yeah, this
conversations.
is short for what I've been doing lately. It's my Q&As usually last about 2 hours.
Well, they're asking questions, though. That's good. You
Yeah.
don't want a Q&A that only lasts 15 minutes. I had one question today,
Yeah.
and it's about my dog. Kind of deal. What kind of shampoo do I use?
Okay. Well,
All
with
right.
that, I'll include that on the list of questions for next week and be happy.
Always. Peace.